After a long, brutal week on the road, in my semi, I finally pulled into the driveway at 1 in the morning. The house was pitch black. Sitting all alone in the laundry room, my teenage son was hand-washing his clothes in total silence. I stared at him, completely lost. "Where's your mom? Where is everybody?" He didn't even look up. He just mumbled, "They went on vacation. Left me here." My brow furrowed. "Why are you using a wash basin? It's the middle of the night. You should be in bed." That was when he slowly rolled up his sleeves and pant legs, exposing a nightmare of dark, fresh bruises. But what I discovered in my wife's bedroom the next morning was what truly blew my world wide open. If you're watching this right now, I'm really glad you're here. Drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you're tuning in from. I'd love to read them. This story contains some fictional elements crafted for entertainment and a deeper message. The names and settings aren't based on any real person, but I believe the core message is something everyone needs to hear. It was October 15th, just past 10 in the morning. After driving 11 straight hours, I pulled onto Marsh View Lane. The first thing I noticed was how unnaturally dark my house was. It wasn't the warm, peaceful darkness of a family sleeping soundly. When people are asleep, there's a porch light on, a blue glow from a TV someone forgot to turn off, or a bathroom light shining upstairs for a late-night glass of water. But this was different. This was a cold, hollow darkness, like a building that had been cleared out, shut down, and abandoned. No cars in the drive, no porch light, no soft glow behind the bedroom curtains, just a dead house. Then, looking around the side yard, I saw a thin line of yellow light under the laundry room door, accompanied by the quiet hum of the washing machine. At 1 in the morning, I just sat there in my idling truck for a moment. 30 years of long-haul trucking teaches you to spot when something is off. An unbalanced load, a spiked gauge, or a house that shouldn't be pitch black. For way too long, I had been turning a blind eye to the subtle, toxic details in that house. Now I was done looking away. I got out, unlocked the front door, and walked back toward the laundry room. My son was standing at a folding table next to an overflowing basket of clothes. He was folding them with a methodical, practiced rhythm. The kind of movement you only learn when you've been forced to do things alone 1,000 times before. His back was to me, and he didn't hear me walk in. Owen. He spun around so fast, he knocked a shirt off the table. When he realized it was me, 2 distinct emotions flashed across his face back to back. First came a wave of pure relief, immediately followed by sheer panic. "Dad," his voice was tight and high-pitched, "you weren't supposed to be home until Sunday." "I know," I said. "The delivery schedule got moved up, I guess." He snatched the shirt off the floor and started folding it again, his hands moving frantically. "I was gonna have everything put away before you got back. You're not mad, right? I've got it under control." I looked at my son, really looked at him. None. Not with the blinders I'd been wearing whenever I tried to convince myself everything was fine. He was thin. Not just slender, but the kind of gaunt you get when you aren't eating right, aren't sleeping, and aren't being treated like a human being. His wrists were so small I could have wrapped my fingers around them. His face held a cautious, defensive posture. The look of someone who has learned to brace for whatever comes through the door. He was only 16, but he looked like a tired old man waiting for bad news. "Is anyone else home?" I asked. My voice came out much calmer, than the rage brewing inside me. He dropped the shirt and gave a half-hearted shrug, a gesture he used whenever things felt too heavy to carry. They went on a trip on Tuesday, I think to the beach. There's a note on the fridge. It was Serena's handwriting. Just 3 lines. Nothing more. Family trip. Back Sunday. Cash in the drawer for food. Owen knows where everything is. No, we'll miss you. No call if you need us. Not even a nod to the fact that they were abandoning a teenager alone for 5 days, as if he were a houseplant that could water itself. Just cash in a drawer, left like instructions for a delivery driver. A sharp pain flared in my chest. I had to press my hand flat against the counter to steady myself. I folded the note in half along the crease and tucked it into my shirt pocket. Then I walked back into the laundry room. "Go wash your hands," I said. "I'll finish this up." Owen stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "Dad, it's fine. I only have a few pieces left." "Owen." I kept my voice low and steady, the way you speak when you're driving a rig over black ice. Slow, smooth, no sudden movements. "Go wash your hands, son. Let me take over." He opened his mouth, closed it, and set the half-folded shirt on the table. "Okay," he whispered, and then he walked out. At 1 in the morning, I stood at that folding table and finished folding my son's laundry. Every shirt felt like a piece of evidence in a case I hadn't fully solved yet, but the outline was becoming painfully clear. When the basket was empty, I turned off the light and sat on the laundry room floor with my back against the wall. Dark, quiet, save for the low hum of the dryer finishing its cycle. I thought back, over every phone call home from the last 3 months. Every time Owen said, "Dad, I'm doing fine," I believed him because it was easier. Every time Serena said, "He's getting better," I let myself buy into it, because the alternative meant admitting I was failing my son from 600 miles away. Something cold and resolute settled in my chest. I didn't know the full extent of the deceit yet, but that was about to change. First, though, I needed to see my son's face in the light, and I needed to make him breakfast. 5 o'clock came. I hadn't slept a wink. Since 3, I'd been sitting at the kitchen table with a stone-cold cup of coffee, watching the sky shift from deep black to the muted purple of an October sunrise in South Carolina. When I heard Owen's bedroom door open upstairs, I stood up and started cooking. Scrambled eggs with cheddar and green onions, just like Claire used to make. Owen came down the stairs in socks and a sweatshirt, his hair messy. He stopped dead at the bottom step when he saw me standing over the stove. "You're cooking," he said. "Once in a while," I said. "Sit down." He sat at the table. Not at the kitchen island and not at the far end, but right next to me, in the exact spot that had been his since he was 3 years old. He looked down at the plate I placed in front of him, with a hesitant, disbelieving stare, like someone staring at a meal they weren't sure they were allowed to touch. "When was the last time you had a real meal?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "I eat, Owen. I eat whatever's left over from their dinners." He picked up his fork, then set it right back down. "Sometimes there isn't much left." I placed my hands flat on the table. "Tell me about the last 3 months. Not the everything is fine story. Give me the truth." He stared at his plate for a long moment. Then he took a slow, shaky breath and began to speak. "They make me get up at 4 every morning." His voice was quiet and flat, stating facts rather than asking for sympathy. "I have to scrub the floors, the bathrooms, the kitchen. Gloria checks everything. If the stove isn't spotless, she makes me do it all over again. She just stands there watching. telling me I'm useless even when I do it right. He picked up his fork and forced himself to take a bite, as if he needed something in his stomach just to anchor himself for what came next. I cook breakfast for all 5 of them, and then I eat on the floor. They tell me the dining table is only for family. The dining table is only for family. I pressed my palms down harder against the wood, clenching my jaw so tight my teeth ached. "Keep going," I said. At night, they leave all their laundry for me. Huge piles. Sometimes I'm not done until midnight or 1 in the morning. He looked up at me for the first time. "That's why I was still up last night. I didn't want you to see it, so I tried to finish it all for before Sunday." "Owen." My voice cracked on his name. I pulled in a deep breath to force the emotion down. "Look at me." He met my eyes. They were completely dry. The eyes of someone who had cried every tear he had in some quiet corner, and then figured out how to keep surviving without them. "My birthday," he whispered. "October 14th. "I called on your birthday," I said. "I called, and Serena told me you were asleep." "I wasn't asleep." He set his fork down. "I was in the backyard, standing outside the kitchen window." He paused. "They bought a cake. Chocolate raspberry. Gloria said it was a celebration. Devin blew out the candles." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "I don't know what they were celebrating. I guess it wasn't for me." My eyes burned so badly I had to look up at the ceiling. "Come here," I said. "Dad, I'm okay. Owen, come here right now." He got out of his chair, and right there in the middle of the kitchen, I pulled my son into my arms. He was so thin, I could feel every single bone in his ribs. As I held him, he gripped the back of my shirt with both fists and let out a sound I will never forget for the rest of my life. Low, broken, and suppressed, like something that had been trapped under immense pressure for far too long. "I'm sorry," I muttered into his hair, my voice entirely wrecked. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it. I should have known." He buried his face into my shoulder, his whole body shaking. We stayed like that until the trembling stopped. When he finally sat back down, he wiped his face with the back of his hand. A rough, practical motion that was pure Claire. He picked up his fork again. "There's one more thing," he said. "Tell me." "Mom's pocket watch." He looked me straight in the eye, the old engraved one. "I found it about 2 months ago." He fought to keep his voice steady. "It was in the left drawer of Serena's nightstand. I was looking for a pencil. She had borrowed mine. I wasn't snooping." The kitchen went dead quiet. "I recognized it from the photo on your desk," Owen said. "The one from your 3rd anniversary. You were holding it in your hand." He hesitated. "Dad, why does Serena have Mom's watch?" I stood up so fast my chair screeched against the floorboards. "Show me," I said. "Dad, Owen, show me right now." I took the stairs 2 at a time. Serena's nightstand, left drawer. I yanked it open. There it was, resting on top of a neatly folded scarf like it was nothing special, like it belonged there all along. My hands shook uncontrollably as I reached down and picked it up. I popped open the casing for my son to see. Claire. It was the watch Claire had pressed into my hand from her hospital bed. The watch I promised to pass down to Owen when he was old enough. The watch I had spent hours desperately tearing this house apart looking for, before giving up because searching for it was just too painful. It had never been lost. It had been taken deliberately by someone who held the keys to my home. "Dad?" Owen was standing in the doorway, his eyes wet again. "That's hers, isn't it?" I wasn't wrong. "You weren't wrong," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to a ghost. I closed my fist around the watch and slipped it into my front shirt pocket, right next to my trip receipts. Why did she have it? Owen asked, desperate for some kind of logical explanation. That, I said, is exactly what I'm going to find out, to understand what happened in that bedroom. And everything that followed. You have to understand who I was before all of this. So let me roll back the clock, all the way back to the summer of 1990, standing at a grocery store checkout line in Beaufort, South Carolina. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 56 years old. I drove long-haul rigs for 30 years, mostly pushing Interstate I-95 up and down from Maine to Florida and back again. A life like that teaches you things about this country you can never learn sitting still. I grew up just outside Valdosta, Georgia, in a house where the heat worked when it felt like it, the power worked most of the time, and my mother worked constantly. She raised me on a custodian's paycheck and a brand of stubborn resolve I'll be grateful for until the day I die. I dropped out of high school at 17 to help pay the bills. I'm not saying that to earn sympathy. I'm telling you because it's the first thing you need to know about me. I'm not a man who expects handout or miracles. I'm the kind of man who inspects the cargo before signing the bill of lading. At 22, I was working as a co-driver, riding shotgun, hauling freight, and learning the routes. On a hot Tuesday afternoon, I walked into a Piggly Wiggly to grab something for dinner. I had grease smudges on my collar. Back then, I always had grease on my collar. She was working Register 3. Also 22, her dark hair pulled back tight, scanning groceries with a fierce efficiency, like she had somewhere far more important to be. When I laid my items on the belt, she didn't even look up at first. "You've got grease on your collar," she said. "Occupational hazard," I offered. Then she looked up, her dark brown eyes staring straight through me. The kind of look that makes an instant judgment and offers zero apologies. "And what's the occupation?" "Depends," I said. "Today, I'm a guy hoping to catch your name before I finish unloading this truck." She almost smiled, just a quick, subtle twitch at the corner of her mouth. "Claire. And Marcus, you still have grease on your collar." "I know," I admitted. "I was kind of hoping you wouldn't notice." "I notice everything," she said, going right back to scanning my groceries like she hadn't just completely upended my entire afternoon. Our first date was coffee at a tiny diner on Boundary Street, mostly because neither of us had the money for anything nicer. She ordered a black coffee and a slice of coconut pie, taking her sweet time with it, and showing zero intention of sharing a bite with me, which I respected immensely. She was fresh off a shift and had night classes at the community college in an hour. She had plans, detailed, written down plans with hard deadlines. I had never met a woman who spoke about the future the way Claire did. It wasn't wishing, it was blueprinting. "What do you want?" she asked halfway through her pie. "Not off the menu, out of life." "Something real," I said. "Something that lasts." She held her coffee mug, watching me over the rim for a long moment. "That's a long-haul answer. I'm a long-haul guy." "I know," she said. "That's why I said yes to the coffee." I didn't fall in love with Claire because of her eyes or her voice, even though both could quiet a room. I fell in love with the way she stood her ground. Not physically. I mean the way she owned her life. Upright, grounded, never leaning on anything that couldn't hold its own weight. She grew up with even less than I did, but she never treated it like a tragedy. It was just the starting line. Everything after that was a route she planned herself. The first time she stood on the porch to watch me pull out for a run, I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday morning, 8 months into our relationship. I was backing my truck out of her driveway. I was practically living there by then, and I happened to catch a glance in the side mirror. She was standing on the porch in a robe, holding a mug, raising a hand in a slow, steady wave. I almost kept rolling, but I stopped. Sitting there in the driveway for 4 extra seconds just watching her before pulling out onto the road. When I got back 4 days later, I told her, "I looked for you in the mirror this morning." "I know," she said. "I saw." "How?" "Because you didn't pull away until I waved." She took my travel mug without asking and refilled it. "You were waiting for the wave." I hadn't realized I was waiting, but she was right. From that day on, I always waited. We got married in 1992 at the Beaufort County Courthouse. Ray Kowalski was our witness, and our reception was a Grand Slam breakfast at Denny's. Claire wore a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself on a borrowed machine. When I told her she looked beautiful, she just said, "I know. Eat your eggs before they get cold." Later that night, across a sticky diner table, she looked at me with those sharp brown eyes and said, "We're going to build something real, Marcus. It's going to take time, but we're going to build it right." She was right about all of it. What she couldn't have known that night, what neither of us could have guessed, was just how long it would take, or the heavy price we'd have to pay to get there. Claire and I made a rule that very night at Denny's. We wouldn't bring a child into this world until our foundation was rock solid. It wasn't that we didn't want kids. God, we wanted a family more than anything. But both of us had seen what happened when people had kids before they were ready, watching families crumble under the weight of unstable lives. We weren't going to do that to someone we loved. So, we agreed, build first, then bring a child into the home we built. We just didn't realize how long the building process would take. I earned my Class A CDL, opening the door to semi-trucks, tankers, and anything over 80,000 pounds. I came home waving that license like I'd won the lottery. "We're making progress," I told Claire. "We're getting there," she agreed, taking the license and taping it to the fridge right next to her accounting certificate. Those 2 pieces of paper represented 6 years of grueling work. "Look at that," she said, stepping back to admire them how side by side. "Not bad for 2 broke kids from Georgia," I said. She turned, wrapped her arms around my neck, and kissed me with everything she had. "Not bad at all," she whispered. Eventually, we bought the house on Marsh View Lane, outright. Paid in full. No mortgage, no bank holding the deed. It was completely ours, just like my mother used to say, real ownership should be. The day we got the keys, Claire stood in the empty living room and wept. Not quiet tears. She covered her face and sobbed until her shoulders shook. I stood beside her and let her let it out, knowing exactly what those tears meant. We'd grown up, living under other people's roofs. It had taken us 16 years to ensure this one was ours. "No mortgage," she kept repeating through her hands. "Marcus, no debt." "No debt," I confirmed. She sat right down on the bare hardwood floor of that empty room and pulled me down with her. We leaned against the wall and sat there for hours, as the evening light faded through the windows. We didn't need to say a word, because we were feeling the exact same triumph. Claire's turned the spare bedroom into a sewing shop. Her first week in business, she cleared $40. She called me while I was at a truck stop in Delaware, her voice practically vibrating with pride through the line. $40, she said. A whole $40. I smiled. $40 I earned sitting in my own house, at my own machine, on my own time. I could hear her beaming. Marcus, do you get what that means? Yeah, I said. I really do. That Friday, she made a reservation at a nice sit-down restaurant. We ordered a bottle of wine, and she talked about expanding, opening a proper storefront one day, maybe hiring help. I watched her talk, thinking, this woman has been building this exact future since the day I met her. I'm just lucky enough to be part of the blueprint. Then 2005 arrived. We felt ready. We were 37, the house was paid off, the business was steady, and my routes were predictable. One Sunday morning over coffee, Claire looked at me and said, I think it's time. I smiled back. I think so too. We shared a look across our mugs, completely unaware of the heartbreaking path that lay ahead. Her first miscarriage happened at 9 weeks. I was on a run up to Richmond. She called me from a hospital bathroom because she didn't want to make the call from a hospital bed. I'm okay, she said, her voice entirely flat. Come home when you can. Don't speed. I drove 8 straight hours, coming home to find her wrapped in a blanket on the couch, staring blankly at a book she wasn't reading. Claire, I started. Not tonight, she whispered. Tonight, just sit with me. So I sat with her. We watched the TV screen, though neither of us saw a thing. Around midnight, she fell asleep against my shoulder, and I sat motionless in the dark, afraid to move and wake her. The second time was in 2007. I'd been on the road for 10 days straight. She called from the hospital again, but this time from the room itself. A quiet sign of how much of her composure was wearing thin. I drove another 8 hours straight. When I walked in, she was sitting in the kitchen. No lights on, just sitting alone at the dark table, with her hands folded. Marcus, don't say you're sorry, she said. Her voice was steady, but it was the kind of forced steady that comes from being held together by willpower alone. I don't want to hear sorry right now. Okay, I said. I sat on the floor right beside her chair, staying at her level because I refused to look down on her during a moment like that. Tell me something else, she said. Like what? Anything will do. Tell me about the road. So, I told her about a truck stop just outside of Roanoke that served the best apple pie I'd ever had. Second only to my mother's. I told her about a dog named Chief, down at the Richmond loading dock, who recognized every regular driver. And I told her about a sunrise I'd seen over the Blue Ridge Mountains 3 weeks back. I'd been keeping that vision tucked away in my heart just to describe it to her. That vast expanse of gold and pink, the kind of morning that makes you understand why the ancients believed a higher power was watching over us. I kept talking until the kitchen window turned, a soft, pale gray with the morning light. Right around 5 in the morning, Claire reached over and rested her hand on top of mine where it lay on the table. Okay, she whispered softly. Okay, let's try one more time. Owen Marcus Webb entered the world on a Thursday morning in March of 2008. He weighed 7 pounds, 4 ounces, with his eyes screwed shut as if he were absolutely furious at the concept of existing. When the nurse placed him in my arms, I completely lost it. Not a quiet weep, and not just a single tear, rolling gracefully down my cheek. I'm talking about a 40-year-old man standing in a delivery room in Beaufort, South Carolina, sobbing so hard that the nurse put a gentle hand on my arm and asked if I needed to sit down. Marcus Webb, Claire called out from the bed. She looked pale and exhausted, yet more beautiful than anything I'd ever seen in my life. Are you crying? No, I choked out. You are definitely crying. I am not. I looked down at this furious, perfect little boy that we'd waited 18 long years to meet, and my voice completely gave out. I wasn't ready for him to be real. He's real, Claire said gently. Yeah. I pressed my cheek against the top of his head. He smelled like something I could never put into words. Yeah, he really is. When Owen was 3 years old, he asked Claire why she always called him my partner instead of my baby, like the other mothers did. Because we're a team, she told him, setting him on her lap. Daddy's out on the road driving. You and we hold down the fort. That's our job while he's away. You understand? He nodded, looking as serious as if he were signing an official contract. He was only 3. What was the best thing that happened to you today? She asked him. You, he said. That's cheating. You're supposed to name something that happened. You happened today, he insisted. She laughed so hard she had to set him down on the floor. He just stood there, looking thoroughly pleased with himself. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the two of them, thinking, this is what we built 18 years, and we built all of this. For 12 solid years, we lived out every promise Claire had ever made. The last time Owen ever gave a genuine answer to what was the best thing that happened today at the dinner table was back in 2020. After that, everything changed. Changes that are still hard for me to speak out loud today. It was the summer of 2020. Owen was 12. I was hauling a load down Interstate 95, just outside Jacksonville, when Claire called. She'd found a lump. The doctor wanted to run more tests. Her voice was calm. Claire's voice was always steady, but I'd driven alongside that steady voice for 30 years, and I could hear what was hiding underneath, a forced composure meant to keep me from pulling my rig onto the shoulder of a Florida highway. I pulled onto the shoulder anyway. I'm coming straight home, I said. Marcus, you still have cargo to deliver. Claire, a silence stretched between us. Okay, she said. Just that one word, but wrapped inside it was every single emotion she'd been holding back for the entire call. Before I even merged back into traffic, I called Ray from the emergency lane. I have to get off the road, I said. Claire's sick. I don't know how bad it is yet, but I need to get home. Ray didn't ask a single question. That's what 20 years of deep friendship buys you. The quiet understanding that says, when things fall apart, I've got your back. No stalling. No bargaining. He went straight to the point. Ray, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling you. His voice took on a fierce resolve, the tone of a man who had made up his mind and was just waiting for me to catch up. She's your wife. Owen is your son. Get off the highway. I need the income, but Dennis and I will work something out on this end. You go home and stay where you belong. A brief pause followed. It's the right thing to do, Marcus. Now go. I went home, and for the next 18 months I stayed there. Until my very last day behind the wheel. I will thank Ray Kowalski for that. The diagnosis was stage 2 breast cancer. The doctors called it cautiously optimistic, LECME, medical jargon for we have reason to hope, but we aren't promising a thing. Claire heard cautiously optimistic and put all her focus squarely on the optimism. That was just who she was. She mapped out a treatment schedule, taping it to the fridge, right alongside my CDL and her accounting certificate. Then she went to her first appointment the way she handled everything else. Right on time, fully prepared, with a neat list of questions written in her crisp handwriting. I went with her to every single appointment. About 3 months into her treatment, I walked into the kitchen around 6 in the morning to find her sitting at the table with a cold cup of tea beside her. She was writing on little slips of paper, scraps no bigger than grocery receipts. "What are you doing?" I asked. She looked up. Her face showed the deep fatigue of treatment, but her eyes were as clear as ever. "Writing notes for Owen," she said, holding one up for me to see. "I'm so proud of you today, sweetheart." My throat tightened instantly, and I had to grip the edge of the counter behind me. "For the times when I'm not here to tell him myself," she explained. "Claire, don't," I said softly, not out of anger, but out of pain. "It's not sad, Marcus. It's practical. I've always been a practical woman. You've known that about me since 1990. How many have you written?" She glanced at the growing stack on the table. 30 or 40, maybe. "That's enough," I said quietly. "I'm going to keep writing until my hands won't let me," she replied firmly. I didn't argue. I poured us fresh tea, sat across from her, and watched her write. It was the most heartbreaking, sacred hour of my life. There are simply no better words for it. Claire fought for 14 months. She fought with discipline and without an ounce of self-pity, the exact same way she approached everything in life. During the final week, when the fight was coming to an end, and she knew it, a quiet settled over her. It wasn't surrender. It was just Claire being practical about something she couldn't schedule or plan her way out of. It was a Tuesday. She had a rare good spell, not truly well, but brighter than she'd been in days. She asked me to sit by her bed. Reaching over, she opened the drawer of her nightstand and pulled out the pocket watch, my grandfather's watch. 3 generations of Webb men had carried it. I'd told Claire about it on our second date. When she asked if there was anything I'd never sell, that watch was my only answer. "Claire, you don't have to." Her hand found mine, holding it tightly as she pressed the watch into my palm. Her strength was fading, but her gaze was identical to the day we first met. Direct, uncompromising, and focused. She was already 3 steps ahead of me. "When our boy is ready, give this to him." "Not yet. He's not ready. But when the time comes." "I will," I said, my voice barely audible. "Tell him." She paused, carefully weighing her words like she always did, as if each syllable had a real cost. "Tell him that time is the one thing no one can ever steal from him." "I promise." She closed her eyes and let out a long, slow breath. "Good. Now tell me about your last route, the one through the mountains." So, I started talking about the road. I described Interstate 81 passing through the Shenandoah Valley at sunset, how the light struck the ridges, and how you could look out the cab window and watch 4 different weather systems unfolding at once. I kept talking until her breathing grew slow, and even until she drifted off to sleep. That was our last real conversation. She passed away on a Thursday morning in March of 2021. Owen and I stayed by her side, the window glowing with a soft, muted morning light. Owen held her hand. At 12 years old, he didn't look away, and he didn't make a sound. In my entire life, I have never been prouder of anyone. 6 weeks later, on the morning I had to go back on the road because the bills were piling up, Owen stood on the porch in his school uniform, with his backpack on. I started the engine, sat in the cab, and glanced in the side mirror. The porch wasn't empty. Owen was standing right there, raising his hand in a slow, steady wave, just like his mother. I sat in the truck for 30 seconds, though it felt like 10 agonizing minutes. Then I pulled away. I cried all the way out of Marshview Lane and didn't stop until I merged onto the highway. That night, Owen called me from home. "Dad," Did you make it okay? Yeah, son. I made it. Good. That's good, he said. Just wanted to make sure. 12 years old, calling to make sure I was okay. After the funeral, I placed Claire's watch inside her jewelry box. For the first year, I checked on it every few months. Some nights I'd open the box just to see it lying there, knowing it was waiting for Owen, exactly as Claire had asked. It was still there when I married Serena, still there. Then the Voss family moved in. 6 months after Gloria and Frank arrived, I decided to take it out. I'd been thinking about it during a long haul, trying to decide if the time had come to hand it over to Owen. But when I checked, it was gone. I tore the house apart twice, blaming myself for moving things during the guest room renovations, or writing it off to the general chaos of 6 people living under one roof. In the end, I stopped looking. Every time I opened that box and saw the empty velvet lining, the look on Owen's face would take me days to recover from. I convinced myself it was simply lost. When a house gets crowded, things misplace easily. I was wrong. It wasn't misplaced. It had been methodically taken from a late woman's jewelry box by someone who calculated that a man distracted by a new marriage and a full house wouldn't dig too deep into family. And I didn't dig deep enough. Not back then. By the summer of 2022, 14 months after Claire passed, I was back to long haul driving full-time. It wasn't because I wanted to be away from home. It was because staying in a house filled with Claire's memory, but entirely devoid of her presence, felt like standing in a room where the air had been replaced by something that looked like oxygen but held none. You could survive inside it, but you couldn't really breathe. The road was easier. On the road, the work was straightforward. Move the cargo from point A to point B. Sign the bill, check the mirrors, log the hours. No empty chairs staring back at you. No unused sewing machine sitting in the corner. Nobody prepares you for the reality of becoming a widower. It isn't the grand, dramatic moments that crush you. It's the relentless daily routine. When you blow a tire at 2 in the morning on Interstate 95, you've spent a lifetime reaching for the phone to call your wife. Who do you call now? When something funny happens on the road, who do you text? When you're stuck in North Carolina and won't be back until Thursday, who keeps track of Owen's dentist appointments, his school permission slips, or the shoes he's outgrown? Claire used to manage all of that seamlessly. When she left, the whole machine ground to a halt. I tried my best, and Owen tried his. We survived. But surviving isn't the same as living. For a year and a half, just getting through the day was the absolute limit of what either of us could manage. In July of 2022, I met Serena Voss at a local community fundraiser in Beaufort. It was a silent auction for the Rotary Club, the kind of event Claire and I used to attend together, chuckling quietly on the drive home. I went alone. I almost talked myself out of going at all. She approached me by the refreshment table. In her late 30s, polished, with a natural beauty that didn't feel forced. She was the kind of woman who walked into a room and instantly looked like she belonged there. "You drove here," she said. It wasn't a question. Her eyes drifted down to my hands, calloused, with neatly trimmed nails and a permanent grease mark on my right thumb that 30 years of heavy soap couldn't scrub away. "I always drive," I said, "mostly long haul." "My uncle drove long haul out of Memphis for 20 years, she noted, tilting her head slightly. "He used to say there was no better education. Sitting up that high, you see everything. How people live, what they throw away, and what they desperately try to hang on to. He wasn't wrong, I agreed. What do you see? She asked. She posed the question like she genuinely cared, as if my answer carried real personal weight for her. I stood there talking to her for 20 minutes. She hung on every word, asking 3 insightful follow-up questions, each better than the last. As I drove home that night, I thought, there's a woman who truly pays attention. I was right about that part. But I was entirely wrong about why she was paying attention. I ran into her again 6 weeks later at a Chamber of Commerce breakfast. I was standing near the coffee urn when she suddenly appeared at my elbow, setting a cup down right in front of me before I could even reach for the handle. Black, no sugar, she said. I looked at her, surprised. You remembered. I make a habit of paying attention to people. She took a seat at the nearest table, relaxed and completely at ease, as if that spot had been reserved just for her. It's just a habit. I mistook it for generosity. I assumed she was a woman thoughtful enough to hold on to the tiny details of other people's lives. It made me think back to 1990, to Claire standing across the grocery belt, saying, I notice everything, and I felt a small, disloyal wave of relief, a quiet comfort in thinking that someone in the world was still paying attention to me. That's the trap of isolation. It doesn't burst through the door with a warning. It quietly erodes your defenses until you don't even realize the wall has fallen. I told Owen about her in October. He was sitting at the kitchen table working through a textbook, just starting his sophomore year. At 15, he was growing so fast I sometimes had to take a second look to recognize him. She seems like a good person, I mentioned. He didn't look up from his book. Does she? I think so. You think so? Or you know so? I stood there for a second, watching my 15-year-old son ask the exact question I should have been asking myself. I'm still getting to know her, I said. Okay. He turned a page and kept reading. Let me know when you know. He didn't say he was happy. He didn't say it sounded great. And he showed zero excitement. I rationalized it, telling myself it was just typical teenage behavior. A kid being protective of his surviving parent. I'd read that somewhere. I was always reading the wrong things back then. What I didn't know at the time. What I only pieced together much later, while sitting in a dark truck cab with a black notebook resting on my lap, was that Serena Voss hadn't bumped into me at that fundraiser by chance. Her mother, Gloria, had singled me out 14 months prior, just 2 months after Claire's funeral. A widower with a fully paid-off home, a steady income, no local family, and a teenage son. In Gloria's handwritten notes, I was simply labeled manageable. Serena had been pointed in my direction like a needle on a compass. She showed up at every gathering, every event. Every time I turned around, there she was, smiling, already knowing what I liked to drink. I thought it was fate. I thought the universe was finally throwing me a bone. I completely misread the situation and stopped asking the questions I should have been asking. By the time I started asking those questions again, they had been living in my home for 18 months, and my son had gotten used to waking up at 4 every morning. We got married in the spring of 2023. A small ceremony. Ray and Dennis drove down from Savannah. Earl and Betty Morrison from next door came over, bringing the fresh scent of Betty's garden with them. A few guys from the depot showed up in their nice shirts. Owen stood beside me wearing a borrowed tie, shaking Serena's hand at the reception, with the rigid, polite demeanor of someone completing a business deal he had never agreed to. I should have paid closer attention to that handshake. The night before the wedding, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, struggling with a pair of cufflinks. They were a gift from Claire, and I hadn't worn them since her cousin's wedding back in 2015. Owen walked in and sat at the foot of the bed, watching me fumble. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "A little," I admitted. "What about you?" "I'm not the one getting married, Dad." "I know, son. I know you're not trying to replace her," he said quietly, staring down at his hands resting on his lap. "I'm not. That's not what this is." "I know." He picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. "I just hope she treats you well." He used the word, "you," not "us." I noticed it. I logged it in my mind, the same way you note a slightly elevated temperature reading on a dashboard gauge. But then I brushed it off as standard teenage angst and went back to fighting with my cufflinks. I filed it under the wrong heading. The ceremony lasted 22 minutes. Serena wore a cream dress and smiled throughout the whole thing, her eyes crinkling right along with her mouth. A detail I'd always taken as a sign of genuine emotion. We held the reception dinner at a restaurant on Bay Street. Good food, fine wine. Earl told a story about chasing a raccoon off his roof at 2 in the morning that had everyone laughing. Owen sat at the far end of the table, eating his meal, polite to everyone, but mostly keeping to himself. 3 weeks later, Serena approached me on a Sunday evening, her voice gentle and her reasoning completely sound. "My mother's lease is up," she explained, "and my father's knees are getting worse. The stairs at their apartment are becoming a real problem." "How long would they need to stay?" I asked. "Just a few months, until they find a better place." She reached out and placed her hand over mine on the kitchen table. "Marcus, they have nowhere else to go right now. They're family, and now they're your family too." I looked down at our overlapping hands. I thought about Owen upstairs doing his homework. I thought about the 4 bedrooms in our house, 2 of them sitting completely empty. "All right," I said. "A few months." Gloria and Frank Voss arrived the following week with a moving truck. 2 weeks after that, Darlene moved in, just temporarily, until her roommate situation sorted itself out. Devon came along with Serena, having already been living with Gloria. She explained that having him stay with us just made more sense. Just like that, a home for 2 became a household of 6. During that first week, Gloria cooked dinner every night. Proper, full meals, pot roast on Monday, biscuits and gravy on Tuesday, chicken casserole on Wednesday. Frank claimed they were old family recipes. She asked about my routes, my driving schedule, and whether I preferred a mug or a travel cup for my early morning coffee. "You work far too hard," she said one evening, setting a plate down in front of me with both hands, presenting it like a prized gift. "A man your age, spending all week out on the highway. You need people around to take care of you." "I do all right," I said. "Of course you do." She smiled. A warm, patient smile, carefully calibrated for maximum effect. "But doing all right isn't the same as being cared for, is it, Marcus?" I cleared my plate and told her it was the best pot roast I'd had in years. She beamed like I'd handed her something she'd been waiting for. I didn't realize it then, but she was cataloging every word I spoke. Every preference, every soft spot, every angle that could be used to steer a decent man, provided you knew which buttons to press. That autumn, every time I returned from a run, the house felt warm and welcoming. Serena greeted me at the door. Gloria waved from the kitchen with a dish towel draped over her shoulder, and dinner was already waiting. Devon had his books spread out over the living room table. It was a picture-perfect scene, straight out of an advertisement. Home-cooked meals. A man welcomed back by family. "How's Owen doing?" I'd ask first thing every time I walked in. "Better every day," Serena would always reply smoothly. "Blended families just take time. You know how it is." I believed her. Every single time I walked through that door, I believed her. What I didn't know then, what I only pieced together much later, was that whenever I was scheduled to arrive, Devon would stand watch at the upstairs window. The moment my rig turned onto Marshview Lane, he would walk to the top of the stairs and call out a single word: "He's here." In the few minutes it took for me to park and walk up to the front door, the entire house was reset. Owen's plate was moved from the kitchen floor back to the dining table. The TV was switched to a wholesome channel. Everyone assumed their designated positions. 4 minutes. 4 minutes. That was all the time they needed. Later on, Earl Morrison sat at his kitchen table over a cup of coffee and told me he had watched this routine unfold through his front window dozens of times. He saw how the activity inside our house would instantly shift the second my truck turned down the street. He said it looked just like the start of a stage play. Lights on. Everyone to their marks. "I should have come over," Earl said, his voice thick with regret. "I should have knocked on your door a dozen times over." "You're here now," I told him. But that was later. That was after the mask slipped. Back in the fall of 2023, all I knew was that the house felt full, and I'd convinced myself that was a good thing. Owen had started eating his dinner standing by the kitchen counter instead of sitting at the table. When I asked why, Serena explained that teenagers just needed their space. And I nodded along, like a driver following a wrong signpost. The temperature was dropping fast for my son. But from where I was standing, I couldn't feel the chill. What I'm about to tell you next, I didn't know while it was happening. I can share it now because Owen slowly revealed it to me in the weeks that followed. Dismantling his silence like someone carefully taking apart something that had been held under pressure for far too long. And because Earl Morrison confirmed parts of it with 47 photos taken from across the fence. The rest, I reconstructed myself, much like rebuilding a highway accident scene from tire marks and scattered debris. I need you to understand that distinction. What you are hearing is the objective truth. It just wasn't the truth I possessed at the time. They managed the household like shifts on a job. That detail still sits heavy in my chest, like something swallowed wrong. What sickens me isn't just the cruelty itself, but how organized and calculated it was. These people weren't acting out of bad tempers or simple carelessness. They had a system. Gloria handled the standards. Every morning before breakfast, she'd walk through the house searching for flaws. The floors Owen had mopped at 4 in the morning were somehow never clean enough. The counters he wiped down still had streaks. She'd make him do it all over again, right in front of her. Owen told me she would narrate his work as he did it, talking about him in the third person as if he were a defective appliance. "This boy doesn't even know how to wring out a mop," she'd say to Serena. "Someone needs to teach him how to do things properly." Owen said, she'd say this while standing barely 3 feet away from him. Frank handled the subtler psychological pressure. At breakfast, after Owen had cooked the meal he wasn't allowed to sit and eat, Frank would speak loudly enough for Owen to hear from his spot on the kitchen floor. "Well, your dad is always out on the road," Frank would say, shaking his head with a practiced, convincing sadness. "Do you ever wonder why he doesn't find a way to be home more often?" Owen told me he tried talking back the first few times. My dad is working, he'd say. That's his job. That's how we keep this home. Of course, Frank would reply smoothly. Long-haul driving pays well. Nothing wrong with a man who prioritizes money. He doesn't prioritize money. Of course not, Frank would smile, pretending to agree. I'm sure he's thinking of you with every mile. Eventually, Owen stopped arguing. He told me it was like trying to put out a fire by explaining to the flames why they were wrong. The fire doesn't care about logic. It just burns. Darlene handled the community side. She'd been laying groundwork around the neighborhood for months. Things Owen mentioned later explained the strange looks I'd been getting from people at the gas station, the hardware store, and the Publix parking lot. Darlene had told at least 6 neighbors that Owen had a habit of stealing, claiming he'd been caught taking things from the Hendersons next door. She claimed she was worried about him, but hesitated to say anything because Marcus was too sensitive when it came to his son. None of it was true. But people believed it. And then there was Devon. Devon was 14, 2 years younger than Owen, and he was being raised in that system the way some kids grow up in a family business. He knew the tactics, he knew the pressure points, and he used them with the casual ease of someone who had never known any other way to live. Owen spent a Saturday fixing up his bicycle. It took up most of his afternoon. The chain had slipped, the rear brakes needed adjustment, and the whole frame needed cleaning and oiling. Devon stood by watching the entire time. When it was finished, Devon took it for a ride down the driveway, returning with a grin. "Thanks," Devon said. Owen told me that thank you sounded genuine. For about 10 minutes, standing out on that driveway, they were just 2 ordinary boys. For a brief moment, Owen thought maybe there was a livable version of this life after all. Then Devon's mother called him inside for dinner. The next morning, Devon walked out to the driveway, picked up that bike and slammed it onto the concrete. Hard. Twice. The front wheel buckled. The chain snapped cleanly off. Devon looked right at Owen and said, "Your piece of junk broke." When Owen recounted that story, his hands gripped the edge of the kitchen table so tightly, his knuckles turned white. "What did you do?" I asked. I went inside," he whispered. "I didn't let him see me cry. I went to my room and cried there." He paused, his voice dropping into a flat, matter-of-fact tone. "They wore all the grief out of me. I stopped trying after that. There was no point in trying." As Owen described, hand-washing clothes in the dead of night. His hands raw and stiff from the cold water. Working through that pile alone at 1 a.m. I could hear Claire's voice in my head, as clear as if she were standing right behind me. "Not yet, sweetheart. Your hands are too small for heavy work. That's my job right now. Your job is just to grow up happy." Looking across the kitchen table, I stared at my son's hands. 15 years old, with rough knuckles and the beginnings of working calluses forming on his palms. His hands weren't small anymore. And over the past year, he hadn't been allowed to grow up happy. I could sit here and lay all the blame on Gloria, Frank, Serena, and Devon, and I wouldn't be wrong to do so. But if I did that, I'd be leaving out a key part of the picture. His father was away 4 days out of 7, calling home every night, completely buying into the lie that everything is fine from the very people running the show. I am never going to gloss over my share in that. That whole rotation only worked because I wasn't there. Plain and simple. And what I haven't told you yet, what makes me almost too ashamed to admit, is that long before I came home early that October night and found Owen in the laundry room, they had already used my absence to turn me against my own son. Not in some dramatic, obvious way, but quietly, piece by piece, through careful manipulation. That's the part I have to tell you now. At the start of 2024, I took on longer routes, staying away from home for extended stretches. I told myself it was for the money. Winter freight rates were solid, holiday overflow was still moving, and the work was there. The real reason, though, was something I couldn't bring myself to say out loud back then. Something in that house had started to feel deeply wrong, even if I couldn't put my finger on it. And when a man can't figure out what's wrong, he defaults to what he knows best. I drove. I put miles between myself and that feeling. For hours at a time, running away almost felt like a solution. It was a Tuesday in February. My phone buzzed while I was parked near A, Flying J outside Savannah. Just sitting at a corner booth with a cup of coffee, going over my logbook. Serena's name popped up on the screen. It was a 12-second video. Out in the backyard, Owen gave Devon a push. Devon stumbled backward, bumped into the chain-link fence, grabbed his arm and dropped to one knee. My coffee went cold. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I could hear it pulsing in my ears. I called her back right away. "Is Devon okay?" I asked the second she picked up. "He's shaken up." Her voice sounded tight and carefully controlled. The tone of a woman managing a crisis. "Marcus, this isn't the first time. Owen, put Owen on the phone." A brief pause. Footprints. Then Owen's voice came through, guarded and completely flat. "Hey, Dad, what's going on out there?" Owen went silent. "Did you push Devon?" The silence before his answer dragged on long enough to tear through my chest. "Yeah," he said. "I did. That's not how I raised you, do you understand me? We don't act like that in this house." "I know," Owen said. Dull, quiet. The voice of someone who had already heard the verdict and was just waiting on the sentence. "When I get home, you and I are having a serious talk about this." "Okay, Dad." I hung up and sat at that Flying J for 30 minutes, staring at my logbook without writing a single word, feeling like the absolute worst father across 4 states. It never even crossed my mind to ask what happened in the 10 seconds before Devon started recording. When I got home 2 days later, I made Owen sit down at the kitchen table, treating it with the gravity I thought it required. The moment I started speaking, his eyes locked onto the floorboards. "Look at me," I said. He raised his head. I can still vividly recall the expression on his face. It wasn't guilt. It was patience, an exhausting, heavy patience. Like a person waiting to see if this conversation would be any different from every single one before it. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" I asked. "Not really. Owen, it doesn't matter what I say, Dad." He spoke without anger, without tears, without a shred of energy. He was just stating an observed truth. It's already been decided. Nothing's been decided. Talk to me. "Okay," he said. And then he didn't say another word, because he had learned a painful truth I will carry for the rest of my life. That talking to me didn't change a thing. Especially not after the other side had already gotten their story in first. I thought he was just displaying typical teenage rebellion. But he was really just a kid who had completely given up on being believed. Then came March, and with it, the paperwork. It was a Thursday night, just 2 days, before I was set to head down to Jacksonville. I'd just finished dinner when Serena placed a document on the table. "What's this?" I asked. "A financial power of attorney." She sat down across from me, relaxed and completely at ease, with zero rush in her posture. "It's so I can take care of the bills and bank accounts while you're out on the road." Right now, whenever something comes up, I have to wait around for you to call back. Sometimes the timing is just too tight. In this country, a financial power of attorney is a serious legal instrument that hands over financial decision-making power to someone else, allowing them to sign checks, access accounts, and handle assets on your behalf. I didn't fully grasp what I was looking at in that moment. "I'll have Dennis take a look at it," I said. "Of course. Absolutely," she smiled smoothly. "It's just for convenience, so I can help out more while you're away." I reached for my pen. Then my phone rang. It was Ray. The Jacksonville load had been bumped up. Instead of shipping out at 7, it was moved to 5. I stepped into the hallway to take the call, and when I walked back 10 minutes later, the table had been cleared, and the document was gone. "We can deal with it when you get back," Serena said from the kitchen doorway. "All right," I said, not giving it a second thought. Looking back, putting that pen down was the luckiest thing that happened to me in 3 years. October rolled around. A major contract in Charleston, taking inventory for a distribution center. 3 solid weeks of work, making it the biggest job I'd landed all year. I started packing the truck on a Monday morning. Serena walked out to the driveway with a wide smile, a smile that felt just a bit too bright, like a fluorescent light flickering right before it burns out. 3 weeks, I said. "Maybe a little less." "Take your time," she replied. "We'll be just fine at home. I know you will." I gave her a hug. Looking over her shoulder, I saw Devin standing on the porch. He was smirking, not at anything in particular. Just the kind of smile people wear when something they've been waiting on finally gets underway. I took it for a kid messing around. Now I know exactly what he was waiting for. I headed south on Interstate 95, the country music turned down low, my logbook resting on the dash. It brought that familiar feeling unique to starting a long haul. Equal parts freedom and solitude. I crossed into Georgia around midday. What I didn't know then was that right behind me, before the front door had even clicked shut, everything inside that house shifted completely. I had no idea that over the next 19 days a client dispute would freeze my contract and send me heading home 3 days early. I had no idea I would pull onto Marshview Lane at 10:04 in the morning, spot that sliver of yellow light under the laundry room door, and hear the hum of the washing machine running at an hour when no one should have been awake, or that everything I thought I knew about my own home was about to be completely written. Before I tell you what I uncovered inside that suitcase, if you're still watching, it's because what comes next changed everything. Please note, this story contains fictional elements woven in for narrative purposes. Some details may not reflect a single real-world event. If that's not your style, it's completely fine to step away now. October 15, 2024. 8:40 a.m. Owen had left for school 20 minutes earlier. I walked him to the door and watched him head down the front steps with his backpack on, neither of us bringing up our breakfast conversation. Some things need time to settle before you touch them again. I stood at the kitchen window until he rounded the corner at the end of Marshview Lane. Then I pulled out my notebook. Not a legal pad, not a note app on a phone. Just the small spiral notebook I keep in my left shirt pocket on every run to track departure times and delivery windows, way come in station numbers, and any detail that might come in handy later. A long-haul driver survives by what he can verify. For 18 months in that house, I had been putting my name on things I hadn't verified myself. That ended this morning. A driver lives by his inventory. You don't just take someone's word when they hand you a bill of lading. You open the trailer yourself. You count the pallets yourself. You check the weight against the paperwork yourself. You never sign off on anything you haven't personally confirmed. Woost. I had been blindly signing off on this family for 18 months. It was time to open the trailer and look inside. I started in the kitchen. First, the junk drawer. The standard hiding spot where things end up when nobody wants to figure out what to do with them. Inside were 3 keys I didn't recognize, and a receipt from a jewelry appraiser in Columbia, South Carolina, dated 4 months back. I don't buy jewelry. I noted down the appraiser's name and address. Next was the bedroom, Serena's vanity. Way in the back of the top drawer, tucked behind folded scarves. 3 debit cards, none of them in Serena's name, and none in mine. A small key on a plain ring, fitting no lock in the house that I knew of. Before touching anything, I took photos with my phone, treating it like an accident scene before the vehicles are moved. Then came the closet. 2 suitcases sat side by side behind the hanging clothes. I pulled the first one out. It was far too heavy for a weekend bag. "Where are you planning to go?" I whispered to the empty room, my voice sounding harsher than I intended. I tossed it onto the bed and unzipped it. It wasn't packed for a beach trip or a weekend getaway. It was packed with winter coats, heavy boots, and enough underwear and toiletries for 4 to 6 months. You only pack like that when you aren't planning on coming back anytime soon. At the bottom of the second suitcase sat a thick envelope, bound tightly with rubber bands and heavy as a paperback book. It was filled with cash, and beneath that envelope lay a small, worn black notebook. Its spine was cracked, clearly opened and closed hundreds of times. I sat on the edge of the bed and flipped it open. The first page was a list. Chionides, 7 names written neat and orderly in a single column. Age, occupation, estimated assets, marital status, family situation. The handwriting was small, precise, and oozed confidence. My name was 4th on the list. Marcus Webb, 56. Long-haul truck driver, CDL. House paid off, truck paid off. Life insurance, to be verified. Widowed 2021. 1 teenager, manageable. No close relatives nearby. Right beside my name was a neat little check mark. Next to it, a single word. Active. Below my name were 2 more entries. Unchecked, just names followed by question marks. Targets they hadn't gotten to yet. I wasn't the destination. I was just a pit stop along the way. I turned the page. Underlined at the top, Edna Pewitt, Nashville, Tennessee. Widow, assets unknown but substantial. Isolated. No local children. Promising. This wasn't a family record. It was a hunting log, and it was sitting right inside a semi-packed suitcase in my bedroom closet. Prepped for a quick departure. I closed the notebook and slipped it into my shirt pocket alongside my logbook. Then I went to look for Owen's phone. I found it under a folded dish towel behind a stockpot in a lower kitchen cabinet, placed with deliberate care. Easy to grab in a hurry, but completely hidden from view. I plugged it into a charger on the counter and waited. When the screen lit up, a lump caught in my throat, so hard I had to grip the edge of the counter with both hands. 157 missed school notifications. 17 missed calls from my number, and a text message from a contact named Jordan. "Dude, are you okay? You haven't been at the lunch table in almost 2 months. Everyone's asking about you months." My son had been cut off from school, from friends, and from me. And there I had been, standing in this very kitchen, listening to Serena say, Everything is fine over the phone. Taking her word for it, like a fool who signs off on a load without ever looking inside the trailer. I opened the photo gallery. There was only one video, 38 seconds long, shot from a low angle, held steady near the ground. Devon was standing in the backyard, looking down at a bicycle. Owen's bike. The one he had spent a whole Saturday afternoon fixing up. Devon picked it up and slammed it onto the concrete, raised it again, and slammed it down hard. Once, twice. The front wheel buckled, and the chain snapped, flying across the driveway. At the very end of the clip, Devon looked right into the camera. He was smirking. Thurzani. In the caption underneath, Owen had typed a note to himself. In case Dad doesn't believe me. Oc 3. In case Dad doesn't believe me. My 16-year-old son, all alone in the dark, had been quietly gathering evidence without telling me or asking for help. Because he had watched me side with them over him so many times that he no longer trusted. I'd believe a single word he said. I set the phone face down on the counter. Gripping the edges of the sink, I took long, heavy breaths until the crushing weight in my chest settled into something I could carry. I had the notebook. I had the phone. In my pocket, I had the pocket watch, the note from the fridge, and the memory of a breakfast conversation that had torn open a wound that would never fully heal. Next came the numbers. I've lived my whole life by numbers. Miles, weights, hours, fuel costs, delivery slots. Numbers don't lie if you know how to read them. I needed to see what had been happening to the numbers in this house while I was out on the road, and I had to figure it out before anyone came back. October 15, 2024, 10:30 a.m. I drove over to the First National Bank branch on Bay Street, where Linda Marsh had been handling my accounts and answering my questions for 11 years. I parked the semi in the lot, walked inside, and asked for 2 years' worth of printouts for every account under my name. Joint accounts, personal accounts, anything linked to my social security number. Linda didn't ask a single question. She just printed out 6 pages. 11 years of steady business earns you that kind of quiet trust. Anything else I can help you with, Mr. Webb? No, I said. This is plenty. I carried the papers back to my truck and laid them flat across the passenger seat, the same seat where my logbook usually sits, and where I'd once set Dennis's legal files. Sitting there the morning after the truth came out, I pulled out my blue route marking pen and began reading line by line. The first 14 months were clean. Standard household expenses. Gas, groceries, the occasional repair. Then, 9 months after the wedding, a transfer popped up. $800 sent to an account number I didn't recognize. I kept reading. $950, $1,000, another $800, $900. The amounts varied, but the pattern was steady. Methodical, unhurried, and never, not once, exceeding $2,200. Knowing standard American banking regulations, I understood immediately why. Under the Bank Secrecy Act, financial institutions are required to file a currency transaction report for cash movements over $10,000. But banks also flag unusual patterns well below that threshold. $2,200 sat comfortably beneath the radar, avoiding automated reviews. Whoever designed this transfer schedule knew exactly where that line was and kept every transaction safely beneath it. That wasn't Serena. Serena didn't operate with that level of precision. That was Gloria. I circled every single transfer with my blue pen, adding up the column twice to be absolutely certain. $47,200 over 26 months. I set the pen down and sat in my truck cab, in the bank parking lot on Bay Street. Doing the math I'd been avoiding since I found that notebook. $47,000. That equaled roughly 94 long-haul runs. 94 times I set my alarm for 4 in the morning. 94 times I kissed Owen on the forehead while he was half asleep, telling him I'd call that night. 94 times. I fired up the engine, backed down the driveway, and drove into the dark for 12, 14, 16 hours with a thermos of gas station coffee and the radio for company. 94 times I called home from a rest stop, truck stop, or way station, listening to Serena say, "Everything's fine. Owen's doing great. Don't worry about us." 94 runs. I sat there, letting the sheer weight of that number press down on me. Then I folded the bank statements along their creases, tucked them into my shirt pocket, alongside my logbook and Claire's watch, and drove to the end of Marshview Lane. At 2 in the afternoon, I knocked on the Morrisons' door. Earl opened it before my hand even left the wood. "Good Lord, Marcus," he breathed. His voice carried an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. Not shock. Relief, maybe. The kind of relief that comes when something long overdue finally happens. "Earl, do you have a minute?" Without a word, he pulled the door wide open and stepped back. Betty was already in the kitchen. Coffee was poured, and 2 mugs sat waiting on the table, as if they knew I was coming before I even knew it myself. "How long have you two been waiting for me to walk through that door?" I asked. Betty set a cup down in front of me. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "A long time," she whispered. "Far too long." Earl took a seat across from me, placing his hands flat on the table, like a man preparing to deliver a speech he'd rehearsed for months. "Before we say another word, I need to get something off my chest. I came close to knocking on your door a dozen times. But Betty held me back most of those times. She kept saying we shouldn't pry into another man's family business." He shook his head slowly. "I know now that was a mistake. I should have walked over. And I'm deeply sorry for that, Marcus. I truly am. You're here now," I said. "That's what matters. What do you have?" He reached into a drawer beside the fridge and pulled out a manila document envelope. He slid it across the table toward me. "I started back in January," he explained. "Betty thought I was just being a busybody, but I felt like I was bearing witness. Marcus, I'm a retired police officer. I know what evidence looks like, and I know what it's good for." 47 photos. On the back of each one, Earl had neatly noted the date in blue ballpoint pen. Owen taking out the trash in complete darkness. The camera's automatic timestamp read 4:22 a.m. Owen sitting alone on the back porch steps, holding a bowl of food. The kitchen window behind him glowed with light, clearly showing 5 people gathered around the dining table inside. On a freezing November morning where Earl's breath fogged the lens, Owen was wearing nothing more than a short-sleeved shirt. I flipped through them slowly. My hands were steady. I forced them to stay steady. And then I came to a photo that made my hands stop dead. Owen standing outside the kitchen window. His forehead was pressed against the glass, looking in at the dining table. A large cake, candles glowing. Gloria clapping her hands, Devon holding a fork, laughing. Earl's note on the back, Oct 14. The boy's birthday. They ate his birthday cake, I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from somewhere far away. They ate his birthday cake without him. He stood there for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, Earl said softly. I timed it. Then he walked over and sat on the back porch steps. Betty's voice broke. I brought him some zucchini bread. She covered her mouth, paused, and forced herself to keep going. It was the only baked good I had in the house. It wasn't much at all. But he took it and said, "Thank you, ma'am," like I'd handed him the world. Her shoulders shook. Marcus, the way he thanked me for that piece of zucchini bread, like a child who hadn't seen a shred of kindness in weeks, because he hadn't. I walked back inside and cried into a dish towel for 10 minutes. I told Earl we should have done something sooner, and he just said, "I know, Betty. I know." She couldn't keep going. She covered her face with both hands, trembling as she tried to compose herself. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "This isn't on you," I said. "Do you hear me? Neither of you is to blame for this." Earl clenched his jaw tight, his eyes red. "He's a good kid, Marcus. No matter what they tried to feed you about him, no matter what rumors floated out of that house while you were away, he is a good kid through and through." "I know," I said. "I know he is." 20 minutes later, I drove back home, carrying 47 photographs, 6 pages of bank statements, and a black notebook listing 7 names. I was driven by a sharp, focused anger, the kind that belongs to a man who is no longer confused by what happened and is fully prepared to take action. I had more than enough reason to be angry, but to settle this once and for all, I needed absolute proof, and to finish it cleanly, I needed Ray. Ray always knew who to call. October 15, 2024, 9:40 p.m. I spent those 6 hours between 3 in the afternoon and 9 at night doing the most ordinary things with extraordinary care. I made dinner, spaghetti, the kind of meal that keeps your hands busy while leaving your mind free to work. I helped Owen catch up on the history homework he'd fallen behind on. I walked through the house, photographing every single room exactly as it stood. Then, I sealed the black notebook, the bank statements, and Owen's phone inside a Ziploc bag, locking it away inside my heavy-duty truck toolbox, a steel locker no one opens without my key. At 9 o'clock, the lights in Owen's room went out. I waited 40 minutes before walking out to the driveway and climbing into the cab of my semi. For 30 years, that truck was the one place that belonged entirely to me. No adjusted mirrors, no altered radio presets, and no stranger's coffee cup sitting in the console. Just the quiet darkness and the singular focus of a man who's made up his mind. I dialed Ray Kowalski. He picked up on the second ring. No small talk. "Do you need me to drive, or do you need me to help you figure this out?" he asked. 20 years of brotherhood means a man can instantly spot the difference between a casual check-in and a call made at 9:40 on a Tuesday night. "Both," I said. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that I need Dennis." Silence stretched over the line. In 2 decades, Ray and I had called Dennis exactly twice. Dennis wasn't the kind of lawyer you reached out to for casual advice. "Give me the quick version," Ray said. I laid it all out in 5 minutes, stripped of emotion. The engraved watch, the notebook listing me as target number 4, the bank statements, 47 time-stamped photos, the October 14th birthday cake, the phone hidden behind the stock pot, and the stock pot, and that 38-second video ending with Devon smirking at the camera. Ray didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he asked just 2 questions. "Is Owen okay?" "He will be. Are you okay?" "I will be." 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, he said firmly. "Don't touch a thing, and don't call anyone else. We'll be there at 7. He paused, his voice turning rough. "Marcus, back at Christmas, Owen barely said 10 words at the table. I felt in my gut something was off back then, but I kept my mouth shut. That's on me. I'm sorry. Ray, it's 9:40 on a Tuesday night. And you're listening to me call. That's more than enough. See you at 7, he said, and hung up. I sat in the cab for 20 more minutes, then slipped back inside the house to confirm Owen was fast asleep. I didn't sleep a wink that night, but I lay still. The closest thing to rest I could manage. Ray pulled into the driveway at 6:53 a.m. Dennis was already in the passenger seat, wearing a suit, a leather briefcase resting on his lap. They sat down at the kitchen table, without pouring coffee or exchanging pleasantries. Owen had already left for school. Dennis Kowalski, Ray's cousin, handled family law and asset protection out of Savannah. He possessed an exceptionally sharp mind and never wasted energy on useless anger when there was work to be done. He went through the evidence like a surgeon, reviewing a pre-op checklist. First, the bank statements, line by line. Next, the notebook, reading every page twice. Third, the 47 photos front and back. Finally, the 38-second video. He watched it once, rewound, and watched it again. He set the phone face down and peeled off the latex gloves. Ray had handed him from the glove box. Gloria Voss is driving the financial scheme. I spoke up before he could ask. Serena isn't precise enough to execute transfers beneath the bank reporting thresholds. Gloria set those limits, and Gloria wrote that notebook. Dennis nodded calmly. Marcus, if you confront them directly, or move this evidence outside legal channels, the focus shifts to you. What you handled, when you handled it, and whether you had the right to touch it. Do you understand? I've driven this road for 30 years, I replied. I know the difference between pushing the engine and blowing it up. He flipped open his legal pad. First, an emergency motion before noon to freeze the joint accounts and the secondary transfer accounts. Under South Carolina law, documented evidence of systematic financial fraud qualifies for emergency injunctive relief. A judge can freeze those assets without prior notice to the other party. We file by 11, and we'll have a signed order by 4. When her card gets declined on Sunday, she'll find out. He tapped the black notebook. Second, these photos and video are more than enough to secure an emergency protection order for Owen, carrying immediate criminal penalties if breached. Third, this notebook goes to a colleague in Nashville today who specializes in elder financial abuse cases. If Gloria used this exact playbook on Edna Pewitt, we have clear pattern evidence of financial fraud and racketeering. Ray leaned forward. Racketeering? Like organized crime? Exactly like organized crime, Dennis said cleanly. Because that's precisely what this is. He pointed to the blue circles on the bank statements. $47,200 over 26 months. I was fourth on that list, I said. 3 came before me, and maybe others who didn't make the notebook. Dennis Kowalski's face, strictly professional all morning, hardened into granite, his jaw set, and his eyes sharpened with a fierce intensity I'd never seen in him before. Then we'll make sure, he said quietly, that there is never a 5th. While Dennis made phone calls from the passenger seat of my rig, I sat behind the wheel doing what I always do before a long haul. Checking my mirrors. Front, side, and rear. Marshview Lane was quiet. Earl Morrison's lawn sprinkler oscillated back and forth, and a neighbor walked a dog. Just an ordinary Tuesday morning in South Carolina. Meanwhile, somewhere out in the Atlantic, aboard a cruise ship named the Caribbean Star, 5 people were posting sunset photos, sleeping off late nights, and resting secure in the belief that their scheme remained untouchable. They had 36 hours left at sea. I had 36 hours on land. The only difference was how we planned to use that time. October 16th and 17th, 2024. While the Vosses posted group chat photos from seafood buffets, tagged each other in sunset videos, and complained about Devon's sunburn, we worked. That is the power of 36 hours when every minute is put to use. At 11:17 a.m. Wednesday, sitting in my truck cab with his laptop balanced on a legal pad, Dennis officially filed the emergency motion. In South Carolina family court, an emergency filing requires concrete proof of ongoing financial harm. Bank statements, transfer patterns, and a target list. Dennis had formatted everything before 9. At 4:47 p.m., he called me back. "Done," he said, the quiet satisfaction obvious in his tone. The judge signed off at 4. The joint accounts are completely frozen. She can't move a single dollar. And that secondary receiving account has been flagged by South Carolina financial crimes investigators. She'll figure it out the second she tries to use her card, I noted. Exactly. The moment she steps off the ship on Sunday and tries an ATM at the Charleston terminal, she'll hit a wall. Dennis paused. Right now, she's out on open water where satellite internet costs $11 a minute and runs like dial-up. She won't suspect a thing until her feet hit solid ground. I let out a long breath, the first real breath I'd taken in days. What's next? Tomorrow morning at 8, Child Protective Services. Bring Earl's photos, the video, and Owen's written statement if you can get it tonight. I'll have the protective order paperwork ready to file alongside it. I hung up, and after dinner, I sat with Owen at the kitchen table. I asked him to write down what had happened over the past year. Not every painful detail, just the patterns. The 4 a.m. routines, scrubbing floors, midnight laundry, the hidden phone, and his birthday. He filled 4 full pages in 40 minutes. His handwriting was neat, clear, and completely devoid of self-pity. Reading those pages later was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do as a father. The Child Protective Services office on Boundary Street opened at 8. I was parked outside by 7:45. The caseworker, a woman named Carol, possessed the quiet composure of someone who had spent decades listening to things no one ever wants to hear. She offered no dramatic sympathy. She simply listened, observed, and processed the facts. She moved deliberately through Earl Morrison's 47 photographs, examining every single one and reading the dates on the back. "Is the boy safe right now?" she asked. "He's been with me since Tuesday night. He hasn't been left alone with any of them since I got back." "How far back does your documentation go?" 10 months of time-stamped photos. 2 years of financial records showing a systematic siphon of family funds. A 38-second video dated October 3rd. I paused. "And 4 pages written by my son detailing the daily routine, which I can leave with you now." Carol set the photos down and looked at me across the desk. "Mr. Webb, I've handled intake here for 14 years. She paused to recalibrate her professional tone. "I need you back here tomorrow morning with all the original evidence, no copies." "I'll be here at 7:50, I said. "The office opens at 8. "I know," I replied. "I'll be here at 7:50. The corner of her mouth twitched slightly. "I'll see you then." Thursday evening, Dennis called again. I was sitting at the kitchen table, checking transfer records for the 3rd time when my phone buzzed. From his very first word, I knew the scope had shifted. My colleague in Nashville located her, he said. Edna Pute, 78 years old, living in Hendersonville, 20 miles outside Nashville. Her granddaughter filed an elder abuse report 2 years ago, claiming her grandmother's property documents were altered while Gloria Voss was providing companion services for seniors living alone. His voice hardened on that phrase. That case was closed back then due to a lack of pattern evidence. Until now, I said. I overnighted a copy of the notebook page listing Edna Pute's name. My colleague handed it to her personally this morning. Dennis paused, carefully choosing his next words. Edna stared at that page for about 30 seconds. Then she said, and my colleague noted this word for word, "That's Gloria's handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. She used to leave grocery lists on my counter during tough weeks. She seemed like the kindest woman I ever met." A sharp ache hit my chest. A 78-year-old woman in Tennessee, sitting in her own home, recognizing the handwriting of the person who had spent years systematically defrauding her under the guise of friendship. "What happened next?" I asked. She cried for a few minutes. Then she stopped, looked up, and asked for a pen. Dennis's voice dropped. She signed a formal complaint on the spot. Her granddaughter drove down from Knoxville to support her, and she asked my colleague to pass along a message to you. He hesitated briefly. "She said to tell you thank you." She said she'd spent 2 years living in fear that it was all in her head and that no one would ever believe her. I rested my hand flat on the kitchen table and sat in silence for a moment. "Tell her she didn't imagine a thing," I said softly. "Tell her she isn't alone anymore." Thursday at noon, Serena sent a text. "Missing you, babe. Wish you were here. The ocean is so beautiful." I was sitting across from Dennis and his legal pads, a fresh cup of coffee between us. Protective order paperwork spread out over the table. I typed back, "Sounds great. Everyone having a good time?" Her reply came back within 30 seconds. "Devon got so sunburned. Haha. Gloria found an amazing seafood spot last night. Having the time of our lives." I placed the phone face down on the table. Ray looked over from across the kitchen. "You holding up all right? Hand me that transfer statement," I said. "I want to verify the October dates one more time." Without a word, he slid the paper over. Saturday night arrived. Owen and I sat at the kitchen table with takeout containers from a local Thai place on Carter Street, surrounded by a peaceful house. A good quiet. The kind that used to exist here before everything went wrong. He didn't wait to be asked if he was hungry before eating. He sat comfortably in his chair, no longer scanning the room for permission. "Dad?" he asked. "Yeah, son? Everything's going to be okay, right?" I looked across the table at my son. He looked tired. He looked tired. The kind of deep fatigue that only surfaces when a person finally reaches a safe place where they can drop their guard. "The next few days are going to be chaotic," I said honestly. "But after that, yes, everything is going to be fine." He nodded slowly. "So, is Mom's watch safe?" I reached into my shirt pocket and set the pocket watch on the table, right between our takeout containers. He stared at it for a long moment, his jaw tightening. He didn't reach out to touch it. He just looked at it with the steady gaze you give something you aren't quite ready to hold, but need to know is there. "Good," he said softly, and picked up his fork. 1 day left. They were scheduled to return on Sunday, and every piece was on the board. Sunday, October 20, 2024. 2:15 p.m. Owen was next door at the Morrisons. Dennis sat at the kitchen table with 2 organized stacks of paper clamped together with binder clips. Ray sat on the front porch holding a coffee mug, positioned where he could watch the driveway, without looking like he was keeping guard. I stood inside by the living room window. 30 years of long-haul driving teaches you how to wait, not passively, but with focused discipline, holding your line until the path clears. Drivers who lose their patience usually wreck before the cargo arrives. I knew how to stand firm. The rental car turned onto Marsh View Lane at 2:47 p.m. Before Frank even turned off the ignition, Serena stepped out of the car. Sunburned shoulders, vacation handbag, wearing the effortless smile of someone who had been pampered for 5 days and expected that treatment to continue straight through the front door. "Babe," she called out, walking up the steps with open arms. "What are you doing home? I thought that Charleston job was running long." "Finished early," I said. "Come inside, Serena. All of you, come inside." Gloria followed right behind Devon and Frank. Darlene brought up the rear, holding duty-free shopping bags, laughing about something. They were all sun-flushed and relaxed, displaying the easy demeanor of people returning home to a reward they believed they owned. The laughter died the second they crossed the threshold. As they stepped into the foyer, Dennis stood up. He carried the quiet authority of a man who controls a room without needing to raise his voice. "Messieurs Voss, my name is Dennis Kowalski. I represent Marcus Webb in family law and asset protection matters." He placed the first document on the table. "This is a court order freezing all joint and secondary transfer accounts. Effective Wednesday, October 16th. You are legally restricted from accessing those funds." Serena's face cycled through 3 distinct expressions in a single second. Genuine confusion, followed by her practiced damsel routine, bringing out the wide eyes and trembling chin she'd used on me for 2 years. Then, as she realized the man looking at her wasn't deciding whether to believe her, but had already reached a final verdict, a cold, sharp bitterness surfaced. "Marcus, what is this supposed to mean?" "Let him finish," I said calmly. "This is an emergency protective order regarding Owen Webb, issued Thursday morning." Dennis reached into his briefcase for another document. "It prohibits unsupervised contact between Owen and every individual in this residence." "Protective order?" Frank blustered. "And then there's this," Dennis added, placing the black notebook flat in the center of the table. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Gloria Voss stared at that notebook like a person watching something they had buried deep underground suddenly burst through the surface. Her hand moved involuntarily toward her neck, a reflexive gesture, checking for something that wasn't there anymore. Where did you get that?" she asked. It wasn't a real question. Her voice dropped every layer of polish she'd cultivated for 30 years. No church warmth, no grandmotherly patience, no fake sweetness. What remained was the raw reality of Gloria Voss, staring at me across her own hunting log. "The suitcase on the left," I said, "under the cash envelope." She studied me for a long moment, a cold, analytical evaluation, the same calculating look she gave every target she selected. "I see," she said flatly. "I know you do," I replied. Serena's composure shattered. "Marcus, please, give me 5 minutes. I can explain everything. I can." "Dennis," Ray interrupted from the doorway. "Walk them through the rest of the paperwork." I stepped out onto the front porch. Ray handed me a cup of coffee without a word. Black, no sugar, just the way I'd taken it for 30 years. I held the mug with both hands, resting against the railing. Through the door, I could hear Dennis's steady voice reading through the documents line by line. Serena was crying, real tears this time, though I no longer cared to tell the difference. Frank was muttering low, asking for a lawyer, while Devon said something sharp, and Darlene snapped at him to shut up. "How does it feel?" Ray asked quietly. I looked out at the oak trees in the front yard, the late afternoon sun filtering through the leaves as Marsh View Lane settled back into its usual Sunday quiet. "Like I just unloaded a haul I've been carrying way too long," I said. "I can finally feel my back again." Ray let out a quiet chuckle. At 8:50 that evening, Dennis's phone buzzed on the table. "It's Darlene," he noted. I nodded, and he switched it to speaker. "I want to cooperate." Her voice sounded tight and rushed, the tone of someone who had sat alone with her thoughts for 6 hours and needed to speak before she lost her nerve. "I want to tell you everything, but I need to know what that means for me." Dennis looked at me, and I nodded again. "Your cooperation will be disclosed to the district attorney before any charging decisions are finalized. It isn't immunity, but it will be documented and carries significant weight. Do you understand?" A heavy silence lingered over the line. "I understand," she whispered, her voice breaking on the words. "I understand. All right, tomorrow morning at 9. Bring your attorney." "Okay," Darlene said. "Okay." The line went dead. At 9:30 p.m., Owen came back home. He walked into the kitchen, stood in the doorway, and looked at the dining table, taking in the empty chairs, Dennis's legal pads, and the closed black notebook sitting right in the center. "Are they gone?" he asked softly. "For tonight," I said. "And soon, for good." He walked over to his chair, the chair that had been his since he was 3 years old, and sat down, as naturally as if he had never been pushed away from it. "All right," he said quietly. "What's for dinner?" I laughed. A genuine, unguarded laugh for the first time in as long as I could remember. It didn't sound like something new. It sounded like recovering a lost piece of myself. Monday, October 21, 2024. At 9 a.m., Darlene Voss walked into the guest room I'd set up for Dennis, accompanied by a public defender who trailed half a step behind her. She took a seat across from Dennis's makeshift desk, rested her hands in her lap, and began to speak. She spoke for 4 straight hours without stopping. At 3:15 p.m., while I was sitting in the pickup line outside Owen's school, Dennis called my cell. "She laid it all out," he said, skipping any preamble, the tone of a man coming off an intense session. "Everything?" I asked. "All of it? The rotation schedule? Who managed Owen on which days? How they coordinated resetting the house before your phone calls? Who handled the financial transfers? The bank account numbers, the 2-year timeline, and the person who capped the transfer limits at $1,150 was Gloria. Gloria designed the entire system. Darlene executed the transfers right on Gloria's schedule. I watched Owen walk out of the school doors, backpack slung over his shoulder, scanning the lot for my truck. When he spotted the cab, his shoulders visibly relaxed, the clear relief of a kid who was learning. He didn't have to doubt if someone was coming to pick him up. "What about the previous targets?" I asked. "We already have Edna Pewitt in Tennessee. And there's a woman in Augusta, Georgia, named Miriam Slade. 81 years old, a widow living alone in the house she shared with her husband for 43 years. Her daughter filed a complaint 2 years ago after a sudden will revision excluded her in favor of a caregiver arrangement that dissolved shortly after the estate cleared." Dennis's voice tightened. "That case was dismissed back then for lack of pattern evidence. Until now," I said. "Until now. Darlene confirmed 4 victims total, including you." She believes there may be others she wasn't privy to. Gloria kept each operation strictly compartmentalized. Darlene only knew her own tasks, not the full scope. Owen opened the passenger door and climbed in. He took one look at my expression and stayed quiet, realizing I was on a crucial call. "How much time is she facing?" I asked. "That's up to the district attorney," Dennis said. "But Marcus, 4 confirmed victims across 3 states, documented racketeering charges, a cooperating witness, a written hunting log, and a 78-year-old woman willing to testify in court." He paused. "Gloria Voss is going to prison for a very, very long time." I hung up. Owen looked over from the passenger seat. "Good news or bad news?" he asked. "Good news," I smiled. "All good news." At 4:30 p.m., Dennis called one last time. His voice carried a different weight this time, no longer strictly professional, but holding a quiet, somber resolve underneath. "Serena tried to use an ATM in Colombia this morning to withdraw funds from the joint account," he reported. It was declined. At 2 o'clock, she tried a second account in Myrtle Beach. Declined again. He hesitated. She bought a one-way ticket to Miami. Charleston International Airport, 6:15 p.m. flight. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles throbbed. "She never made it to the gate," Dennis said softly. 2 Beaufort County deputies were waiting for her at security. She had $14,000 in cash inside her carry-on, bound in rubber bands. Buy a one-way ticket to Miami with $14,000 in cash, I said. The police said she told them it was all just a misunderstanding. A brief pause came over the line. Of course, there was no misunderstanding. I walked out to the back porch and took a seat on the steps. It was the exact same spot Owen had been sitting in during that October 14th photo Earl took. The moment everyone else was inside eating his birthday cake. I sat there holding my phone, letting the reality of it all sink in. That's how it always feels when official proof confirms a terrible gut feeling you've been afraid to speak out loud. "Marcus," Dennis began. "I'm okay," I said. "I really am, and I meant it. Not in the way Owen used to say it, that guarded, careful kind of 'I'm fine', meant to shield the people you love from a painful truth. I was truly okay. The kind of okay that means you finally see the whole picture, and you know you have what it takes to handle it." Dennis called back for a third time at 6 that evening. "Edna Pruitt's granddaughter drove down from Knoxville this afternoon," he said. They sat at Edna's kitchen table and went over every single piece of evidence. The notebook page, the financial trail, and Darlene's statement from this morning. "How did she take it?" I asked. "She broke down," Dennis said. "Cried for about 10 minutes. Then she wiped her nose, asked my colleague for a pen, and signed her name on every page of the formal complaint." His tone turned softer than it had been all day. "She said, and my partner wrote this down word for word. She said, I want the other victims to know they weren't crazy. I want them to know that somebody finally saw through it all." A knot formed in my throat. "Somebody finally saw through it all," I repeated. "Somebody finally saw through it all," Dennis affirmed. At 7:30 that night, I knocked on the door to the in-law suite. Frank opened it. "You two need to be out of here by 8 tomorrow morning," I said. "Both of you." Dennis put together a full list of everything brought in from outside this house. "You can take those items." A familiar look crossed through this door. A familiar look crossed Frank's face. He was searching for the version of me that used to make sense to him. The Marcus who, with enough pressure and patience, would back down, second-guess himself, and be talked out of it. Marcus, if we could just sit down and talk like reasonable adults. We are talking right now, I said. 8 tomorrow morning. Dennis will be here to oversee the move. Gloria stepped into the hallway behind him. She looked at me with that signature composure, the cold calm of a woman who had managed tight situations before and knew exactly how to keep them under control. Family works through things together, Marcus, she said, her voice warm and perfectly measured. It was the exact same tone she'd used on me for the last 18 months. That's what family does. You're not my family, I said. You never were. 8 a.m. I pulled the door shut. Standing in that hallway outside their room, my hands were shaking. It wasn't fear. By then, I knew the difference. It was an adrenaline surge, not panic. The tremor that comes after the fight is over, not before it starts. I stood there until my hands stopped shaking, then went to find Owen. We sat on the back porch as the October night settled over us, crisp and clear. It was the kind of autumn evening in South Carolina that makes you feel like the rest of the year was worth enduring. What happens now? Owen asked. Courtrooms, lawyers, and time, I told him. The legal system moves slow, but it moves. And it carries weight. Darlene's full confession, the notebook, the bank records, Edna Pruitt in Tennessee, Miriam Slade in Georgia. It's a pattern of criminal activity spanning 3 states. A documented pattern is exactly what prosecutors need to build a rock-solid case. He pulled his knees up to his chest and stayed quiet for a long moment. Dad? He said. Yeah? I kept that video because I thought you wouldn't believe me. His voice was tentative, cautious. The sound of someone who had waited a long time to ask a question he was afraid to hear answered. Was I wrong? The question hit me like a clean, sharp blade to the chest. No, I said. You weren't wrong. I wasn't listening to you the way I should have. That's on me. I looked at my son in the dark. But I'm listening now. And that is never going to change. He leaned his shoulder against mine. We sat there until the stars completely filled the Beaufort sky and the October breeze turned cold. Neither of us moved to go inside. What came next didn't resolve in a week or even a month. The courts have their own rhythm, deliberate, procedural, and entirely indifferent to anyone's desire for speed. I had spent 30 years living by departure times, delivery windows, and tight schedules. Learning to let the legal system move at its own pace was one of the hardest adjustments I ever had to make. But it moved. And here is where things ended up. 3 months later, in January of 2025, Dennis called me. I was on a short run down to Savannah. My first overnight trip on the road since October. You in a good spot to talk, he asked. Give it to me straight. He gave a dry chuckle. The short version? Darlan's statement went deep into the financial setup and the systematic emotional manipulation of Owen. Bank records backed up every single number she gave us. Edna Pruitt's signed complaint tied Gloria directly to the estate fraud in Tennessee, and Miriam Slade's daughter in Georgia finally had enough evidence of a pattern to get her mother's case officially reopened last week. He paused. Marcus? Gloria Vance walked into the wrong man's house. She walked into a trucker's house. Works for me, I said. Dennis agreed. In February of 2025, Selena appeared in Beaufort County Family Court. Her attorney argued for leniency, a troubled upbringing, heavy influence from her mother, claiming she wasn't the mastermind behind it all. The judge looked at the bank statements. She looked at Earl's 47 photos, including the picture of a 15-year-old boy pressing his forehead against his own kitchen window on his birthday. "Mrs. Vance," the judge said, "the paper trail before this court shows long-term, calculated premeditation. I find the argument of simply being under someone else's influence extremely hard to accept." Selena glanced over at me from across the courtroom. Her expression went through that same sequence I'd seen on the porch back in October. Attempting to put on an act, and then realizing no one in that room was buying it, the underlying truth finally broke through. I looked back at her, feeling nothing beyond what I had already processed and left behind. She accepted a plea deal. 4 years in state prison for conspiracy and financial fraud. The marriage was declared invalid. Not a divorce, but a full annulment. Under South Carolina law, that meant the court found the marriage was built entirely on fraudulent misrepresentation from the start. On the legal record, it was as if it had never happened. Dennis explained the distinction to me later, in the parking lot, leaning against the freezing hood of his car. "Annulled," I said, "like it never existed." "Legally speaking," Dennis said, "it never existed." "Good," I said. Throughout 2025, Gloria Vance faced accountability before 3 different judges in 3 states. In Tennessee, Edna Pruitt sat in the front row of the gallery, her granddaughter right beside her. She gripped her purse with both hands, watching every minute of testimony with the quiet intensity of a woman who had waited 2 years to hear the truth declared out loud. In Georgia, Miriam Slade's daughter stood at the podium during the victim impact statements. From her first word to her last, her voice didn't shake once. The legal process gave the person most impacted a direct voice in court, entering onto the permanent record the true toll of what had been taken, a loss no amount of money could ever fix. In South Carolina, Dennis personally read Owen's 4-page statement into the official court record. Since Owen was 16, I had asked him if he wanted to be there. He thought it over for a full minute before saying no. He didn't need to be in the same room with her to make his voice heard. Dennis read every word in his calm, steady tone. Gloria was convicted on 19 counts across all 3 jurisdictions, including forgery, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, criminal conspiracy, and organized racketeering. At the sentencing hearing in South Carolina, the judge set down his pen, looked over his reading glasses, and said, "You treated other people's trust as a renewable resource. It is not. 14 years. Frank received an 18-month sentence at a minimum security federal facility in Georgia, a structured environment designed for nonviolent first offenders. He entered a plea of no contest and served his time quietly, which was probably the most constructive thing he had done in years. In exchange for her full cooperation, Darlene received probation and 200 hours of community service. Sometime that spring, she relocated to North Carolina. I never tracked what happened to her after that, and I realized I didn't need to. Devin was placed with distant relatives in Ohio, 13 years old. I found myself thinking about him more often than I expected. He had been raised inside that manipulative system, the way some kids are raised in a family business. The language, the tactics, the mindset of seeing people as problems, to be managed. He had absorbed all of it before he was old enough to know any better. That wasn't something a 13-year-old built on his own. I didn't forgive what he did to Owen. I wasn't sure forgiveness was something I owed Devin Vance. But I kept a small space in my mind to recognize that he had been taught to act that way. And what is learned can sometimes be unlearned. At 13, there was still a chance for a different path. In March, we repainted the kitchen. Owen spent 2 evenings spreading color swatches across the table before finally choosing a soft blue-gray called Morning Mist. "You sure about this one?" I asked, holding the swatch up against the wall. "It's our house," he said. "We can make it look however we want." Ray drove over from Savannah on the weekend to lend a hand. Betty Morrison brought over lunch both days. Sandwiches on Saturday, a big pot of soup on Sunday. Earl sat in a lawn chair out back, offering unsolicited opinions on the trim color that everyone politely nodded along to, including me. At the end of the second day, Owen stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at the fresh walls, wiping paint off his hands with a rag. The late afternoon sun came through the window above the sink, hitting the color just right. "Dad," he said. "Yeah? Mom would loved this color." My voice was a little rough around the edges, but I let it be. "Yeah," I said. "She really would have." By the summer of 2025, the house on Marshview Lane felt like itself again, the way it used to feel before any of this happened. Owen was back at his usual lunch table at school. Jordan, the boy who had texted him back in October asking where he was, had been waiting for him all along. Owen mentioned it casually one Tuesday night, like it was no big deal. But it was a big deal. Ever since I found Claire's pocket watch in Selena's nightstand, it had stayed in my left shirt pocket every single day. The pocket where my logbook usually went, the spot closest to whatever I needed to keep safe. With Owen's 16th birthday 3 weeks away, I remembered a promise I'd made in a hospital room on a Tuesday afternoon 4 years ago. I had been waiting for the right moment to honor it. Now, I knew what the right moment looked like. It looked like this. It looked like everything we had rebuilt. It looked like a kitchen painted the color Claire would have picked, and a boy who had grown into every word she'd ever written for him. It was time. October 14th, 2025. Owen's 16th birthday. I was up by 5:30, standing in the dark kitchen in front of the stove, brewing coffee and scrambling eggs with cheddar cheese and green onions in the skillet. That was how Claire used to do it. It was also how I had made breakfast for Owen on the morning everything came to light a year ago. Some mornings, you want to fill the house with something good before anyone else wakes up to ask why. Ray and Dennis arrived together at 8. Ray walked straight through the front door without knocking, just like he had for 20 years. Earl and Betty Morrison were right behind them. Betty was carrying a covered dish that smelled like the coffee cake she made whenever something in life was worth celebrating. Owen came downstairs in socks and a sweatshirt, his hair sticking up in 3 directions. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs when he saw the full house. "What's going on?" he asked. "Don't just stand there. Grab a seat before the eggs get cold," Earl said from his spot at the table. Owen looked around at everyone. Ray and Dennis holding their coffee mugs. Earl already offering his thoughts on something. Betty setting the cake on the counter with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who brought exactly what was needed. An expression crossed my son's face that I'll remember for the rest of my life. His eyes brightened, his chin trembled just a bit, and he pulled out his chair. His chair, the one that had been his since he was 3 years old, and sat down as if taking that seat was a moment he had been waiting for a long time. "This is how it's supposed to be," he said softly. Betty reached over, covering his hand with hers, squeezing until her knuckles went white. "Yes, sweetie," she said. "This is how it's supposed to be." After breakfast, Ray and Dennis moved to the living room, and Earl took his coffee and his opinions out to the back porch. I stayed at the kitchen table. Owen started gathering the plates. "Leave those for a second," I said. "Come sit down." He sat across from me. The October sunlight was coming through the window over the sink. The same window Owen had pressed his forehead against a year ago, watching a birthday setup that didn't feel like his. But from the inside, the light looked completely different. I reached into my left shirt pocket. The logbook pocket, the one closest to what whites I keep seeing, pulled out the pocket watch and set it on the table between us. Owen's hand paused on the table. "Your mom wanted me to give this to you when you were ready," I said. "She didn't tell me how to know when you were ready, but I just know." He picked it up, his fingers tracing this clasp on the casing with the care of someone holding something long sought after. He opened the latch. "For our boy, Claire." He let out a sound I won't even try to describe. He pressed the watch tight against his chest, leaned forward over the table, and wept. It was the kind of crying that comes when something heavy has been held inside for far too long. His whole shoulders shook with it. I stood up, walked around the table, and placed my hand on his back, keeping it there. "She wanted me to tell you something," I said, my voice barely holding together. "She said time is the one thing nobody can ever steal from you." He nodded, choked up, and managed to say, "They tried to." "They tried," I said. "But they couldn't keep it. It came back home. Just like everything that truly belongs to you always does. Eventually." He sat back up and wiped his face quickly with the palms of his hands. The exact practical gesture his mother used to make when she refused to let tears have the final word. "I'm going to wear it," he said. "Good. You don't have to wear it every day. Just." He looked down at the watch in his hand. "On the days that matter." "That's right," I said. He reached into his hoodie pocket and set the shoebox on the table. Claire's notes. He'd brought it down from his room. "There are 9 left," he said. "I read one every morning. I didn't tell you." "I know. Should I slow down, make them last longer?" I looked across the table at my son. "Read 1 a day," I said. She meant for you to read every single one, right down to the last. He slipped the box back into his pocket. An hour later, Ray and Dennis were getting ready to head back to Savannah. I needed to move my truck out of the driveway. I climbed into the cab and started the engine. 30 years of habit had me checking the mirrors before pulling out. I glanced in the rear view. Owen was standing on the porch in his socks and sweatshirt, the chain of the pocket watch just visible at his collar. He raised his hand, a slow, steady wave, unhurried and calm. It was the exact same wave his mother had given from that very porch for 20 years. I cut the engine, stepped out of the truck, and walked back up the driveway. Owen watched me walk up. "Forget something?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I forgot I don't need to be anywhere else right now." He shifted over on the porch step to make room. I sat down beside him. The October sun filtered down through the oak branches just like South Carolina autumn sunlight always does. Warm, golden, unhurried, and perfectly complete without needing to apologize for a thing. We sat there for a long time. Neither of us said a word. Neither of us needed to. There were 9 notes left in that box. 9 more mornings where Owen would open one, see his mother's handwriting, and read the words she wrote, for every single day. She knew she wouldn't be there to say them herself. "I am so proud of you." Today, I used to view those notes as a countdown, something running out. I don't see it that way anymore. She wrote enough. She knew her son. She knew what he would need, and she made sure it was there for him. She knew what she was doing all along. She always did. I'm just a truck driver. I spent 30 years learning to read the road, and I almost missed the most important thing happening right inside my own home. If this experience taught me anything, it's that silence doesn't mean you're blind. I stayed quiet out for too long. Not because I didn't love my son, but because I was afraid of what I'd have to do if I finally acknowledged what was right in front of me. Don't make that mistake. Don't wait for a pile of middle-of-the-night laundry to tell you something is wrong. Pay attention to the small details. Notice the empty chair at the end of the table. Notice the kid who says, "I'm fine," in a tone that means the exact opposite. I'm not a perfect father, but I made it home in time to turn things around. And I truly believe that everything lined up the way it did for a reason. Stories like this aren't just about standing up for your family. They're about what happens when ordinary people stop looking the other way and start paying attention. I'm not proud of having had to go through it, but I'm proud of how it ended. If Owen's story resonated with you, or if you've seen something similar in your own life, drop a comment below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Share this with anyone who needs to hear it. And if you connect with stories about standing up for what's right, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Every story we tell here is another family journey worth witnessing. Thank you for sticking with me until the end. It really means a lot. The following stories contain fictionalized elements crafted for educational and dramatic purposes. If that's not your style, no hard feelings. Choose whatever content nourishes your soul.